that, because I'll have friends and like, sometimes they just like their idea of a good time was like going to the club. And, like with like chronic illness, that's not really the best spot for me. And, balance issues, that's not, so it's like, it's understanding that people, yeah, it's nothing personal, that's something I've learned. It's nothing personal. But just always kind of feeling that I'm not the same as other people my age has been the common denominator throughout my life. And
Danielle, welcome to the Trips and Global on Wheels podcast hour.
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I'm going to read that bio you sent over just so that everyone has an introduction to you.
Okay, sounds great.
Can you say, before I do that, can you say your whole name once for me?
Yep, my name is Danielle Connolly.
Connolly or Con?
Yeah, I know that people always ask that. I've always said Conley, but I think Connolly is the correct way. But I
It's
answer to both, but
Conley.
I think I just say Conley, but I think the first way you said it is right.
Yeah, that's why I always like people to say it because it doesn't necessarily sound like how it looks.
Yeah.
So Danielle Conley. Okay. So Danielle Connolly is a rare disease and disability advocate, content creator, and business and marketing professional. Being born with a muscle disease that still has an unknown origin after 29 years has given Danielle many unique life experiences that set the course for her various ambitions. After she took her first vacation with her friends as an adult, she realized that she is more capable of traveling than she realized. Upon returning from the trip, she swiftly got her own mobility scooter and started planning more adventures. The idea of documenting these adventures and giving accessibility reviews came about, and then many other ideas for content and series, such as Breaking the Fourth Wall of Disability, followed. Thus, Daniellevates. Do you want to say that one?
Yeah, the second one. Yeah, I just combined Danielle and Elevate. So yeah, Daniellevates is how I say it.
Awesome. Daniellevates was born. Daniellevates is a play on her name combined with the word elevate because the content is all about elevating ideas about disability, rare disease, and chronic illness through humor, storytelling, education, and adventures. Wow, that's great work.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so to kick off, I'm sure you've gotten this a lot as your first question, which is what do you say to someone who knows nothing about navigating life, with a rare disease? I know one article wrote that, I'll quote it here. It says Danielle was 5 years old when she was officially diagnosed with mitochondrial disease complex 4. So could you share with us like the symptoms of this disease and what's unique about your day to day that most people don't have to worry about?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because that when that article was written, I did think I had mitochondrial disease. But actually I think like probably about 2 years after that point, my doctors like said that there was more technology that was up to date to do genetic testing, and then it was found that I probably don't have that. So that kind of opened up a whole can of worms. And even today, I actually just got a call from a research center. So they're looking into doing more testing. So I still am considered technically undiagnosed, but having a muscle disease. So as far as navigating a rare disease, it's tricky because technically I'm in that undiagnosed category now. Before, when I felt more of a member of the mitochondrial disease community, so I could kind of feel part of the community. But I've actually learned recently in the past year, I there was a foundation that formed the Undiagnosed Disease Foundation, and so I realized that there's a whole undiagnosed community out there. So I definitely recommend finding a community. And Global Genes is another great rare disease organization that kind of houses and supports all rare disease foundations. So they're a great resource to look into as well as NORD, which is the National Organization of Rare Diseases. They have some resources as well. But it is tricky because the biggest thing I say is you have to be your own advocate, because a lot of times you'll meet healthcare physicians that are honestly kind of nervous when they meet you. I'm lucky because I've lived in the Boston area my whole life, so I've always gone to like prestigious research hospitals. But when I go in like the suburbs for local, things where I think it's simple, I realize that they're kind of nervous. So you kind of have to work together and honestly, you have to do a lot of educating, which at first seems unfair and kind of absurd, but you gain confidence in it along the way.
Yeah, sounds like uncharted territory. So at least when you have a diagnosis, then you have a list of symptoms and you can be more clear about how to move forward, right? When you don't.
Yeah, because even now, because on one hand, when they were like, when the results came back that I probably didn't have mitochondrial disease, but they didn't know what I had three muscle disease genes, but only single copies of each. You need two copies of each, so it provided more questions than answers. And at first, there was a part of me that was relieved because to Google mitochondrial disease, it comes up a lot of honestly scary results. Every patient's different, but having something with nothing to Google at all was almost freeing in a way. But at the end of the day, knowledge is power. So I have continued my pursuit to seek a diagnosis because like you said, it's good to know like what I should avoid, what I should do if possible. So yeah, so I definitely I kind of adjusted each way. I'm like, okay, this is a little nice, but eventually I'm like, okay, I need to start moving along again. Whether I can get, because even today it was funny. This morning I just had a call with the genetic counselor. They're like, well, our lab has only had success finding like almost solving medical mysteries a few times, but we still try. So it is interesting to be, being considered a medical mystery, but I'm pretty stable for the most part. So that definitely helps in pretty much every way. I say mental health first, is what is helped the most by my being mostly stable, like weakness wise.
Yeah. I know it's either knowledge is power or ignorance is bliss, right? So I really resonated with you when you wrote, I think it's one of your blog posts. I'll quote you here and you tell me where it's from. So you said, while I always tried my best to make the most out of every moment, when you grow up disabled, you can't help but feel like you are looking from the outside in at times. So I often felt the same way growing up. I use a manual wheelchair due to polio and scoliosis. So could you provide some vivid examples of different situations where you felt that way and what you think and what adaptations could have been made either with the physical environment or how could people around you have behaved in such a way that made you felt more included at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't remember where that's from, but I remember saying it. And it's definitely something I've repeated. And it's something that I've always said I could continue seeing happening just, um I can elaborate more on that in a bit, but when you first it's like for me, everyone's experience is different, but I was born with a disability, and at first I kind of just considered it like a medical condition, like I have a muscle disease. And then I feel like accepting disability was more accepting like how I'm affected like socially and in my environment. So I first started noticing that, I didn't really consider it being a part of the disability community until years later. But looking back, I realized, it was first when like, I made a little clip about this once, but as a kid, if you go to a pool party, the kids are in the pool, they're out of the pool, they're in the pool, they're out of the pool, they're in the house, they're painting nails, and then I couldn't keep up. So I made a little clip about in my content I try to use humor about how eventually I just sit at the mom table, but that was actually where all the good gossip was. So I kind of made light of it. But that was my reality where it was kind of like at a certain point, I couldn't keep up. And that was, it did lead me, as an adult to avoid social situations with big crowds because I always felt like if I don't have someone like with me, staying with me, I'm just going to be in a corner, awkward. And then I blame myself. I said I'm the awkward one. And even though rationally I knew like I couldn't keep up when I was younger, but but I still felt like I couldn't mingle, you know what I mean? And it took me a long time to kind of trace the roots of that back to those, trailing behind moments. And then, it's like people in school, people find their extracurricular activities. And even though I do credit my mom with doing a great job of like putting me in the art classes and letting me try anything that I wanted to try, but people do form relationships in sports, like like friendships, and then they do other things after. And then that was something I couldn't participate in high school. Went on, I was too fatigued from the whole day and then keeping up with homework and grades, and academics was important to me. So I felt kind of left out at that point too. And then college I actually commuted because I felt like in order to keep up with everything, that was like the best thing for me to do. Looking back, I see where some people are successful, living on college campuses. So that's one of my series I'm trying to start on my YouTube, where I just filmed the first one. I haven't released it yet, but I'm like touring college campuses and like talking to people with disabilities, how they're doing and stuff, just to provide options, and to show people different case studies. But that was another example. But then even as an adult, I it's tricky because you want to keep up with people, but like um that because I'll have friends and like sometimes they just like their idea of a good time is like going to the club, and like I with like chronic illness, that's not really the best spot for me, and balance issues, that's not, so it's like it's understanding that people, yeah, it's nothing personal, that's something I've learned. It's nothing personal, but just always kind of feeling that I'm not the same as other people my age has been the common denominator throughout my life. And um it's something that I could see continuing in a way, because with the unknowns of my genetic condition, like I don't feel like it's like, and I know this is kind of a little bit of like a controversial subject because some people may choose differently, but I just feel like it's not really wise to on purpose have a child with when I have so much undiagnosed genetic issues. So, I feel like seeing people like I'm turning 30 in a couple months, like, this is the age where people start having kids and stuff like, and that's another scenario where I can see myself looking from the outside in, but I've kind of made peace with this for so long that it's, and I've experienced the outside looking in for so long that I've kind of realized we're all on different journeys. But still you feel the feelings kind of pop up here and there nonetheless.
Yeah, I relate on so many fronts with what you said, and as I'm sure many listeners will too. And like those formative those experiences from our formative years from when we're really young really shape us. I feel like as you were talking about keeping up, a very vivid experience came to mind of playing with friends when I was younger, because I didn't use a wheelchair when I was younger. I didn't start using one regularly until I was 11. And so, and I used to pick up my feet with my hands because I have muscle atrophy in my legs. And so just like keeping up, I remember there would be like these long sets of stairs and everybody else would be running down, up and down them very easily. And I just remember looking at those flights of stairs and feeling so overwhelmed. And I've thought back at those experiences a lot over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we have like images that, pop out at us, and, that we can feel the same emotion even though it's so many years have passed.
Yeah, exactly. So, how have the next question, transitioning a bit, how have friends or family members advocated for you in a way that you feel like was really healthy and effective that others can learn from?
Yeah, that's a great question because I feel like one thing that I bring up a lot is not in every case, but a lot of the times when you're born with a disability, you tend, again, not always, but to be the only disabled person in your family, with that disability. And that was the case for me. I'm the only physically disabled person in my family. So I think that it's great when parents of disabled children like educate themselves and learn. So I think this is a great topic because I do give my mom a lot of credit because she did a great job when there weren't a ton of like resources out there, about parenting a disabled child because she always like I said earlier, like tried to encourage me to just try everything, like and do what I can do and focus on what I can do and then she also like she advocated for me at school and all that. I did go to a school that was a private school that wasn't accessible and it was she does talk back at the time they were kind of like, I don't know what this is like the school for her. And then my mom is like very Catholic, so she wanted me to have a Catholic education. And then so she was like, the sign out there says like Jesus accepts everyone, or I forget what the sign said. So it's like, how can this school not, accept her? And then so I did go there. It was interesting, being the only disabled one in school, and that continued through high school. Um, and so she definitely advocated for me in that way to have the same opportunities as everyone else. And she encouraged a lot of independence as well. Like, she at times I'd always be groaning, like, because she always preached like financial independence, like, like you need to because it's tough because um the world as a whole does not consider people with disabilities. So it's like it's tough out there. Like, like for people that do have to rely on the system and benefits, like it's not luxurious at all, that so she's always, no, she hasn't pushed me to the extreme, but but because she's always like, take care of your health first and foremost. But, if you can just, get what you need, like get everything like, to your full potential. And so since she's definitely been my biggest supporter, I would say, and I do have a few close friends that I've had for a while and then, met some others along the way. But I will say I'm more someone that has a small group of friends, like close friends, like, I was never someone with a million friends. And and that does go back to being disabled too, because you're not always accepted. Being disabled isn't exactly a status symbol of coolness going through school, especially when you're the only one. So, and school is where a lot of people do form their friendships. But within the past year, creating content online, I've actually made connections with the disabled community and the rare disease community, all that more than I've ever have, which is great. Because like we connected through Diversability, which is a great organization that I've gotten a lot out of resources wise. So yeah, so that's been great. But it took me a long time to connect with the disability community because society kind of puts a lot of messages out there, and I wouldn't consider myself having a dynamic disability because for the most part I do walk, but like longer strenuous things I used to get like pushed in a transport chair, but now I have my mobility scooter. But a lot of times society just paints disability as wheelchair users. So I always felt like I didn't want to take up space and say I'm disabled when I'm like, well, that's for them. I don't want people to think I'm stealing attention or things like that, which is obviously a toxic belief, but one that society kind of can perpetuate.
Yeah. And so, in terms of those are great, by the way. I think I think the more of us share how others have helped us, um, either self advocacy or friends or families advocating in a healthy way, those are always like good information to spread out into the world. Just because I feel like we also see a lot of unhealthy and disempowering ways that people try to advocate and help.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah, even though their intentions are very good. So the next set of questions are just so you get a heads up a little bit deeper on identity. So with that first question, um, Do you think your disability has affected your femininity? And if yes, how?
That's an interesting question and one I've never thought about. I will say, like, at first I was gonna say no. But when I think about the way I talk about myself sometimes, I would have to say a little bit yes, because one example I always give with my disability when I say like, yeah, like, what I post online is always, one thing, but I always like admit in the description like I'm a work in progress like everyone else, like, like tackling these insecurities is a progress thing, even though I'm saying that I do give that disclaimer. And one of those examples is like throughout my life, like when I get out of a chair, it's very slow and um like it takes a lot of effort, especially if it has wheels. But I if I'm meeting someone for the first time and they don't know I'm disabled, like I always kind of dread it, like before I get out of a chair. So a lot of times I'll even now, like that's why I say it's a work in progress. So I'm like, I don't know what the right thing to do is. Do I mention the elephant in the room or I don't? But like so I've always just said, oh, when I get out of the chair, I always get out like that. I have a muscle disease. Like, and sometimes it's just casual like that, but sometimes for whatever reason, and less so now that I've kind of worked on things, but before I would always feel my face getting really red and stuff like that. So that's an example where and like the way I get upstairs as I'm like I'm pulling myself up. So the way I talk about myself sometimes is like, oh, I'm not very graceful. The way I get out of a chair is kind of unattractive. Like I'll even say stuff like that. So I think in that way I've kind of consider myself the opposite of graceful, which is sometimes a synonym people use or a word people associate with femininity. So I feel like what I consider a lack of grace, just because of just the way that I move around, is a way that I've kind of felt that being affected.
Yeah, I was going to add, I was also, with that question, I was also going to add femininity slash sexuality, but I didn't know if that would be too much and too packed into one question. But if I was to add that as well, do you have anything else to add?
Well, just like a topic like, like online dating is a situation where you have to like think about where you want to like disclose or whatever. So, um, like I can only speak for, a woman that's looking for a man, so everyone has different experiences. So before I would just, like I said, my experience is meeting someone for the first time, whether that's a guy or that's just a situation in school or work or whatever. But that's just meeting anyone for the first time. But like online, like at first, like I would never meet someone for the first time without mentioning it, which surprised a lot of my friends. They were like, "What? Like you won't just show up?" And I'm like, no, that's not the way it works because, yeah, people could, but I'm like, if you're gonna get rejected, if I'm not gonna get rejected for my disability, I'd rather it just, not waste my time getting all dressed up and going out and telling people, I'm going out. If they're gonna just reject me for that, might as well just, be at home in my pajamas and no harm, no foul, even though it is, nuanced. But at first I would just kind of bring it up in conversation or when like the topic of meeting in person came up and I would just have a disclaimer that I'd copy and pasted about like, hey, I can, skip the lines at Disney World, but I do have a physical disability. So if that's a problem for whatever reason, like I'm like, well, if you're a big, because I live in New England, like if you are a big skier, obviously I'm objectively not offended because if you ski every weekend, we're not going to be a good match. So it was really interesting. I am glad that I started off that way because it was almost like a case study. Like I didn't keep like statistics, but I did like after I gave that disclaimer, like seemingly right before I said that they wanted to go out with me most of the time, honestly, over 50%, probably 70% of the time, it would just be no response, ghosted. And it was like annoying to me because I'm like, I literally just pretend you ski. Like that's like I'm like, I gave you it out with the skiing or hiking comment. Just pretend you love to ski. don't make it so obvious that you're so appalled by even the idea of, something having a disability. And then occasionally, sometimes someone would be like, "Yeah, I'm looking for a gym buddy," and I'd be like, "Okay, whatever, that's fine." And I would never like attack anyone either. I would just say, "Okay, best of luck on your journey or whatever." And then some people would be fine with it, but again, it was a small percentage, probably like 2 out of 10 or even 1 out of 10 between there. So yeah, and then now, I'm a lot busier these days, like, so I was like, I don't have time to talk to people and then get rejected 80 to 70% of the time. So now I just have it as one of my prompts about how I can skip the lines at Disney, but I have a muscle disorder, so if that is an issue, then I say have fun frying in the sun in the lines.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of these experiences you don't necessarily like hear about or talked about, although more and more with social media. And I saw your Instagram and saw some of your videos and your YouTube videos, travel vlogs as well. And you're so natural and also so willing to tackle some of the more sensitive topics as well. I was surprised to see you exploring some of the quote unquote taboo topics. Um, I found the one on religion and disability interesting. So I actually do have a question about that. I know you said on your platform that you're a Christian, right?
Yes.
So how do you understand your disability from the perspective of being a Christian? What's unique when looking at your disability from the lens of being a Christian?
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's one that I wish was talked about more because, I like, you know, um, I grew up going into, like, Catholic churches, and now I consider myself more like, I do hold some of those spiritual beliefs, but the structure of it all, I consider myself just, like, kinda non-denominational just because, I don't believe in everything in the Catholic Church. I'm mostly just the spiritual stuff now, um but as far as, because the way a lot of churches, like Christianity, like I can really only speak for Christianity because that's just what I've been exposed to, but they kind of position disability as a like pity disabled people. And it's funny though, because like there's a verse in the Bible that's like I don't have it off the top of my head, but um it's talking about like who Jesus says people should who people should invite to their party. Like, because it's like I think he was referring to like people putting up people with like money or prestige on pedestals. And he was saying like, you should invite the poor, like poor people, and I kind of hate the way the Bible says like the lame, the poor, like I don't, I'm just, those are long ago terms, but I mean like that's just how it was phrased. But like poor people, like sinners. I'm doing air quotes if you're listening to the podcast, sinners or whatever, outcasts of society. But he also says invite, the lame, but invite disabled people. Like, so that's what I always like try to remind people. I'm like, he's saying invite disabled people to the party. So like for me, that's saying like include them in society. And I'm like, that's like never brought up. I've never heard that this perspective brought up in any like church. It's always like pity the disabled people. And it's kind of funny because like so many churches aren't even accessible. So it's just there's a lot of hypocrisy. And that's why I say I focus more on the spirituality of like my Christian beliefs because so much of like the structures of churches has gone to the wayside. That could be a whole podcast episode, but that's how I view it. Like I know like some people, and I've never subscribed to this. Like, think their disability is a punishment for something, or a sin, or or a past life, or I don't believe in any of that. And like and a lot of Christian beliefs say like God made us all perfect. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like I kind of view it as, I don't view it as like a punishment or anything like that. I just view it like that we're all individuals. We all have differences, whether it's a disability or something else. And me having this rare disease, having this disability is just another thing that makes me unique.
Yeah, with such a big Christian population in this country, I'm surprised this is actually the very first time I've asked a question like this to a podcast guest. So I think having as many perspectives share their thoughts as possible is so important. And you're right, we often, whether it's from people who are religious or not religious, we often, as people with, especially with like visible disabilities, which I saw on your social media page, we often, get unsolicited attention um, in terms of personal space and well wishes that are good intentions, but come off in a very uncomfortable way.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like you mentioned, like the clip I made was, and then I collabed with someone else from Diversibility, Laura. It was kind of about how people, and I'm sure you've probably experienced more than me. I don't want to be presumptuous, just being a full-time wheelchair user, but where some people come up to you and be like, I'm praying for you. Like, and it's just like, you're just minding your own business. Like, if you were to say that to someone else, I'd be like, why? What's wrong with me? Is there something on my face? Like, like what happened? Why are you praying for me? And it's just kind of this idea that we can't be happy unless we're cured. And it was interesting that when I made the content channels, I was almost like, can I combine being a rare disease advocate with disability? Because so often the rare disease space is cure focused. And so I'm like, should I really like, but I'm like, well, both experiences have contributed and will contribute to my content. So I think it's important. And I always kind of say it's like a nuanced topic. Like, the reality is like if something were to come out for a rare disease, it's a treatment. Like, like cures, or even if you have a medicine that's a cure, you're probably going to get side effects because that's with any medication. And I kind of view it as more of like a marketing technique, you know what I mean? But so I always say treatments, and then and it's all about more having longevity and having the choice, and just improving quality of life if that's what you choose. If you don't feel like you need any treatment, then that's your choice. So the cure all belief is pretty toxic because it makes it sound like you have to put your life on hold. Even me being technically undiagnosed, I can't put my life on hold until I get a diagnosis because it may never happen. So it's like I just have to live my life. So like you said, it's well meaning. And I even had another clip and someone commented to me, like, you should just be grateful if someone's being nice to you. But the clip was basically it happened to me in real life and I just reenacted it. But someone told me two people, this has happened to me twice, told me to get well soon. Um, and I had just said, "Oh, thanks," like, because I was so caught off guard. But the reality is I'm not getting well soon. So they meant well, but it's like, it's important for us to talk about these things because yeah, I'm well adjusted, but what if I just got diagnosed yesterday and someone told me to get well soon? I'm still trying to process the trauma of a new disease, or someone could have got bad news. Like, so yeah, it's just being mindful, and I think it's educating with the belief that people do mean well. We're not trying to make a villain out of anyone. It's just it would be helpful if people were willing to learn about this topic is just what I hope for.
Yeah, actually, this transitions really, really well onto the next question I was about to ask you before you made that commentary. So, in your opinion, what is disability pride, and how do you come to grips with your need to find a cure for rare disease? So, can one have pride in their disability and advocate for a cure with their disease? So, just build on what you just said. You don't need to repeat anything.
Sure. I definitely think it's possible, and that's what I came to the conclusion of because like I said, it's not really getting rid of the disability, it's not getting rid of the community. I think disability pride is all about one having dignity and respect for yourself, and it's being proud of who you are, and it's a process. Like I said, it's like me having disability pride is me not being embarrassed about the way I move about the world or the way I get out of a chair, and it's me being open that I have a disability. Like, yeah, I've had a disability, but I've accomplished X, Y, and Z. Or even if I haven't accomplished something recently, it's just me having a disability, and this is the way I this is my life, this is me as an individual, because we don't have to be so I do have a bit of productivity guilt in my life where I always feel like I have to be productive. And I think some of that comes back to the disability where I have a chip on my shoulder having to prove people wrong because there are stereotypes. So it's kind of being pride, having pride in yourself despite of what maybe stereotypes or society is saying about you, which aren't true. And it's also, I think, in a broader aspect, having pride in the innovation and advancements that have been made by the disabled community for the disabled community, but also the ones that have benefited society as a whole that people don't even think about. And then as far as connecting that with looking for treatments or cures for rare disease, like I think it kind of goes back to um valuing, what people who are chronically ill or people who have rare disease have to offer the world. Because if you have a really rare disease that very few people have, there's not a lot of incentive for companies to research that because it all comes back to money. But if these people's lives are being shortened, that's it says a lot about uh our attitudes as a world if we don't care. It's like, well, if only a few, like it's like, well, these are, like I always go back to, we're all individuals, we all have power to change the world and the world of those around us. So it's like I think it's always looking at things from an individual point of view and looking at people as a collective of individuals rather than just a nameless group. So it's all about and the fact is, the world is not super accessible. So I always go back to, and then besides that, there's not a ton of resources. Like I just know in the US, there's a huge caretaker shortage crisis. You know what I mean? So it's like, if we're not going to solve these problems that technically are easier to solve, accessibility, building ramps, building elevators, it's easier to solve than curing a disease that only maybe a couple people have, but we're choosing as a society not to prioritize it. But um, if we can give people access, whether that's through medical research, advancements in technology for assistive technology, or society getting their act together and making the world more accessible, then I think all of those different aspects can work together.
Yeah, that was very well said. Thank you. So we only have a couple minutes left. So one more question. What is your biggest dream at the moment?
That's interesting. I was I this would be a long answer if I went into it, but throughout my life I used to do the 5-year plan type of things going through school because like I said, I was always very academically focused and they all didn't technically work out, some due to health flare-ups and this, that, and the other thing. So I try not to like set these concrete goals for myself. I try to take things day by day, which has allowed me to be open to new opportunities. So I'll just say very generally, I just like to be happy and fulfilled and keep building off of what I'm doing. I'm like really feeling fulfilled and excited about these platforms that I've made and just so I just hope to keep building it and connecting with other people like yourself and seeing more progress in the world for people who have disabilities and rare disease would be a big general dream of mine that kind of connects to some of my work that I'm doing.
Yeah, and that's also so important because I was looking through your contents and you do, like you said, we shared in the bio, you use a lot of humor and it's very engaging content. And, you know, I do want to see more people with disabilities being more present on social media, on everywhere, actually, but social media as well. So where can people find you on social media and follow your great work?
Yeah, so short form content is on Instagram, so Daniellevates, but on Instagram I have an underscore before that. So some people think it's Danielle Vates. That's my name, but it's just Danielle Vates. And YouTube and TikTok, it's Danielle Vates with no underscore before it.
Okay, awesome. We're about to be cut off, but it was so great talking to you, Danielle. Thank you so much for your very in-depth responses.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.